are resilient, we are enduring, and like those bricks that build bridges and mighty structures, when we come together, there is nothing we cannot do, create, or overcome. And fueled by this spirit, fueled by this love, and a sense that there's nothing we can overcome, 7 years ago, buoyed by so many residents, when I began as mayor, I made all of these bold proclamations of intent. A lot of the folks on the stage remember we put out bold vision statements. We said that Newark would set a national standard for change, for transformation. This was my vision, but frankly, this was Newark's vision. Folks in our city knew the potential, and they were tired of settling for anything less than bold change. And so, the path of progress we know is a rough road, especially when you're facing horrendous headwinds, like a global recession that shook the foundations of cities all over our state and nation. But you see, Newark, with our strength, with a bold vision, and the courageous commitment of thousands and thousands of people who love this city, we overcame. And tonight, I want to tell you all the story of the transformative change we have made. You see, remember when I entered office? Back in 2006, people were leaving Newark more than they were coming. Our population was declining. Businesses and those who dreamed of starting businesses in our city found little support from the city. And they were taking their jobs and innovations elsewhere. Remember also that in 2005 and 2006, violent crime was spiking and tearing at the fabric of our community. We were handed a budget with a startling $118 million budget gap on track to grow to over $200 million. City operations were deeply dependent on tens of millions of dollars of non-reoccurring revenue that would quickly evaporate like water on a hot summer sidewalk. And with the recession, lines of support to all American cities, from the federal government and state governments, weakened, waned, or just went away. In my first weeks as mayor, I tell you, I was humbled by the difficult conditions many of our most dedicated employees were working under. I remember my very first day, the very first hours after I swore the oath, I went down to the South Ward and walked into the precinct there. When I walked in, I'm telling you, parts of it looked like an episode from Barney Miller, with our police wasting hours doing work on typewriters that belonged in the Smithsonian Museum. Instead of spending their time on the streets protecting residents, they were filling out forms on typewriters. Officers even had non-functioning bathrooms. Some of them were leaving the precinct just to use the facilities. Many committed officers were going in their own pockets, using their own money to buy tools, to jerry-rig and make makeshift fixes for police equipment. And I saw in the police department and the fire department, many of them, or officers, were using their money to buy computers to try to make their jobs easier and more efficient. I'll never forget the smell of that precinct. It smelled like urine, and the conditions even for the people that were arrested were abysmal as I saw folks handcuffed to radiators. All over city government, supervisors, those in charge of managing the day-to-day operations, had very little access to critical management data. For example, we spent weeks, Bo Kemp, my first BA can tell you about this, we spent weeks in the beginning conducting manual desk audits just to nail down the exact number of city employees we had. We were sending millions of dollars offensively to the people of Newark. We were sending millions of dollars of critically needed grant money back to the federal government due to lack of compliance. And as was the case with the COPS grant, intended to put more police on our streets, we were banned from applying for future funds because of noncompliance. There was hardly a department or division that didn't have these loyal, hardworking employees with stories of profound dysfunction. So I'll never forget when our great then Corporation Council came in and told me that with roughly 4,000 employees, we had over 3,500 outstanding workman compensation claims, liabilities that could have further crippled our city financially. And so, 7 years ago, joining with our directors, division heads, with frontline workers, a host of pro bono consultants, loaned executives from places like Prudential and others, I led our city in perhaps our least sexy, but most important endeavor of my time as mayor, the hand-to-hand combat of full-scale management turnaround. We recognized an understandable lack of confidence. One of the first things we saw was the lack of confidence in the integrity of government. You see, we took over and saw that this lack of integrity had real financial, operational, and social costs. And so, taking advice from a guy who I still refer to now as my big brother in government, our county executive, Joseph DiVincenzo. Joe, I have here pause for applause. This is where people should be applauding your name. I've taken all your advice, Joe. You haven't taken mine and shaved your head. What's up with that? So Joe gave me the advice, get an inspector general. And that's exactly what we did. With cooperation of the council, we created the office. And since then, this inspector general has secured 19 indictments of city employees who were stealing from our residents, all closing out with guilty pleas. We've handled over 150 additional cases administratively and have seen a significant decrease in reports leading to investigations. But in addition to establishing systems of accountability for those rare employees who seek to violate our city's ethical standards, we knew that we had to give our senior leadership and our day-to-day managers access to that critical management data. We needed to help them have the transparency of operations needed to make better management decisions, to be more accountable ultimately to the residents. So we created our own take. After sending people down to Baltimore, we created our own take on Baltimore's famed CityStat program and named it Brick CityStat. This management system represents a profound advancement in our ability to govern effectively here in Newark, and entails the relentless collection, analysis, and implementation of management data. It's tied closely to our innovation of creating Newark's first central line for all city complaints, inquiries, and issues, our 4311 line. Brick CityStat now can track customer satisfaction like never before and better hold my managers accountable for serving our residents. So take, for example, last year, Brick CityStat has been digging in on issues where our residents have been pointing to most, complaining about most. Using data and greater discipline, improvements are being made across the city. In sanitation, for example, where we used to have rampant reports of missed pickups, in the last year alone, they have gone down dramatically, 58%. And we're continuing to focus on where our residents are talking about. And so everywhere we look, our improved management and accountability is actually saving money. We went from a city with out-of-control workman compensation claims to consistent across-the-board reductions in those expenses and the collateral benefit of making our workplaces safer. This year, the cost of workman comps claims has declined dramatically in our city. For example, neighborhood and recreational services, it's down 74%. Engineering, down 80%. Child and family well-being, workman comps claims and the cost is down 88%. Also down is overtime in departments all over the city as schedules are better managed and the productivity of our workers go up and up and up. Again, for example, over the last 2 years alone, we reduced monthly overtime in sanitation 40.7%. In motors, it's down 53%. And police overtime, which was nearly $20 million in 2006, is down to $5 million now. Before our management turnaround, Newark was not only losing money needlessly in overtime costs and costly injuries on the job, but also we had a rampant problem of chronic employee absences all throughout our city. These absences were costing our city money and costing our residents in the poor delivery of services. Now, with systems in place to track absences, deal with chronic offenders, and measure the departmental improvements day after day, we've seen a dramatic turnaround. For example, in child and family well-being, where people do everything from provide immunizations to our kids to critical services for our seniors, absences are down 25%. In engineering, the folks who do everything from fix our traffic lights to prepare our roads, absence is down 40%. In neighborhood and recreational services, where people do the vital work of cleaning our streets and tending to our parks, absences are down almost 50%. This has led to across-the-board spikes in productivity. Work is being done. It's being done more quickly, more efficiently, more effectively, and is being measured with greater discipline, transparency, and detail. So from the speed in filling potholes to the number of children we're immunizing, we have seen dramatic increases in the quality of service and the productivity of our employees. Here's a great example. In our Division of Code Enforcement, this past year alone, these hard-working employees who have had significant staff reductions have increased the number of inspections per inspector 98%. The hard work of our dedicated city employees, paired with Brick City Stat monitoring and oversight, has meant that from the buildings our residents live in to the restaurants our residents dine in, we are more quickly identifying and even preventing problems and ensuring citywide health and safety. These statistics are not sexy enough for headlines, but they represent a transformational change in city government, and we're getting better every day. These are everyday breakthroughs, everyday accomplishments, when added one to another, make our city stronger, safer, and more successful. You know, 7 years ago, though, we knew that we not only needed to transform management, literally implementing new systems of accountability, but that some of our agencies actually needed radical interventions. And we had to rebuild them literally almost from the ground up. The Newark Housing Authority was one such agency. The federal government was threatening to take our housing authority over. Many of you remember those headlines. The residents in public housing were facing unconscionable conditions, and our public housing facilities contributed to some of our most challenging health, crime, and family issues. As mayor, while this agency was under federal authority, I believed it was fully in my responsibility to see it turned around. So immediately after election, before I even swore my oath of office in this building, we led reform. Now look, I want to publicly apologize to perhaps one of the greatest Newark unsung heroes of my administration, and that's Newark Housing Authority Director Keith Kennard standing behind me. He got mad when he showed up in Newark because everybody kept calling him Cory Booker. We thought he was going to be my stunt double. Well, look, I apologize to him because when we both started in 2006, in my very first meeting with him as mayor-elect, I raked that brother over the coals until I was confident in his leadership and satisfied that he and I had the same vision and determination to reform that agency, but also to make what we knew were going to be unpopular decisions necessary to do so. And then, in order to hold him accountable for better results, and partner with him to implement that vision, I turned my focus to the Newark Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. And on that board, in a leadership position, as chairman, I appointed with the support, and I express my gratitude, of the City Council, another one of our city's unsung heroes, the chairman of the Housing Authority Board, my chief of staff, and somebody that's appallingly thin, Modia Butler. And so, listen to the story. Mo and the Housing Authority team, what did they do? Well, in 2006, only 90% of our apartments were leased. Well, now that number's up to 98%, and that actually means that small change from 90 to 98% means that hundreds of more residents have a roof over their head. Back then, that's worthy of applause. But it gets better. In 2006, only 70% of the rent was being collected. Now, 97% of the rent is being collected, which means that critical dollars are being reinvested in our housing authority to serve our residents. And listen to this, the average wait time for emergency repairs in 2006 was 6 days. Emergency repairs, this means burst pipes, exploding toilets, floods. The average wait was 6 days. Now the average time of the repairs is done in less than 24 hours. The conditions, absolutely. The conditions found prior to my arrival and the arrival of this administration earned the Newark Housing Authority a spot on the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's troubled list. Now we serve as a national model as Keith entertains delegations from around the country who come to Newark, New Jersey, to see what an example of a high-functioning housing authority is doing. And amazingly, all of these improvements came as we made painful decisions to cut staff dramatically. From 900 full-time employees in 2006 to 379 now. This was a difficult and unpopular transition, but the 58% reduction in staff has allowed us to invest in the housing authority, transforming projects, creating transformative projects like 980 centrally monitored public safety cameras, protecting our residents, and the modernization of 24 low-income senior buildings, finally giving thousands of our residents, especially our elderly, housing facilities that better reflect their dignity. Because of this leadership, I just want one more time to ask both Keith Kennard and Modia Butler to stand up and get some thanks. Mo's over there. Keith, thank you. And like the NHA, another critical agency that we inherited that needed to be rebuilt from the ground up was our city employment office. There are few tasks more important in this economic climate than helping Newarkers prepare for, get, and keep employment. And at a time when Newarkers were struggling to find work, the principal agency responsible for placing Newarkers on the job was failing dramatically. In fact, it failed 50% of the state performance measures in program year 2005. That was unacceptable. So we acted forcefully, reducing staff, hiring new leadership, improving and streamlining operations, increasing corporate participation, and making meaningful appointments, incredible appointments, to the Workforce Investment Board. In the most recent program year, we have not only exceeded all of our state benchmarks, but I want to focus in on one in particular. Adult entered employment, meaning the people that actually got jobs. In 2005, that was a 57% placement rate in that program year. Today, it's 84%. They are doing a phenomenal job. And as Newark is beginning to boom economically, it is preparing our residents to seize the thousands of new jobs from our hotels to our port warehouses. I want to thank right now the team, the management team that's been doing a great job, and I just want them all to stand up. Arcilio Aponte, the director, Kathy Weaver, who's the chair of our Newark Workforce Investment Board, Melita Valentine, the executive director of the Newark Workforce Investment Board, and Norma Gonzalez. Where's Norma? Norma Gonzalez, our one-stop director. They have created a transformation. Now, similar to the crises and the Housing Authority and the One Stop, we took over another agency critical to our city's success, an agency that was also tainted by a corruption scandal and crippled by mismanagement. Our division of housing and real estate was in a shocking disarray, and tragically, when we walked in, we're suddenly reading letters that we're about to have to give back millions of dollars of home funds taken back by a federal government who said we weren't meeting our requirements for those grants. And so we, again, led a massive turnaround to save that money and make a change. We restructured the department. We hired new managers. We set up transparent systems of accountability and critical metrics. I personally, knowing the housing crisis, went out and fought for grants, lobbied in Washington, attracted philanthropy, and brought in new partners to help us build despite a housing crash. Now, after 7 years, again with reduced staff and reduced federal funding, and in a down economy caused by a housing crash, we have accomplished what some people said was absolutely impossible given these conditions. We have increased the rate of affordable housing production in this city by more than 100%. Over 1,600 more affordable housing units have been completed and are under the construction over the last 7 years, with another 400